Story 1. I wasn't expecting to become a hero that day, but life has a funny way of surprising you. My name is Madison. I'm a 23-year-old woman who's always been a bit of a troublemaker. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows each other's business. My parents were strict and overbearing, so I rebelled whenever I could. When I turned 18, I moved out and never looked back. One day, I was hanging out with my best friend, Evelyn, at a local coffee shop. We were chatting and having a good time when I noticed a group of teenagers making a ruckus outside. They were being loud and obnoxious, disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. I looked around, expecting someone to take action, but no one did. "Hey, do you guys mind keeping it down? People are trying to enjoy their afternoon," I said to the group. One of the teenagers, a boy who looked about 16, smirked at me. "What are you going to do about it?" I didn't back down. "I'll call the cops if you don't quiet down." The boy laughed. "Go ahead. They won't do anything." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I expected, the dispatcher didn't seem too interested in my call. "We'll send someone over if we have the resources, but there's not much we can do about noise complaints." I hung up, frustrated. Evelyn shook her head. "That's the problem with small towns. Nobody wants to do anything about the troublemakers." I thought about it for a minute and then came up with an idea. "You know what? I'm going to teach these kids a lesson." Evelyn looked skeptical. "What are you going to do?" I grinned. "Malicious compliance." Evelyn looked even more confused. "What's that?" "It's when you follow someone's orders to the letter, even if you know it's going to cause problems for them." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And how is that going to help?" "Just wait and see," I said, feeling a bit smug. I walked outside and approached the teenagers again. "Hey, I talked to the cops and they said they can't do anything. But I have an idea. How about we have a little contest?" The boy who had talked to me earlier looked interested. "What kind of contest?" "I'll bet you $50 that you can't be quiet for an hour," I said. The boy laughed. "You're on. Easy money." I grinned. "But here's the thing. If you make any noise at all, I win." The boy looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, no talking, no laughing, no shouting, no music. Total silence for an hour. And if you make any noise, I win." The boy shrugged. "Fine. You're on." I handed him $50 and started the timer on my phone. The teenagers gathered around, looking amused. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, shaking her head. The first few minutes were uneventful. The teenagers tried to keep themselves occupied by playing on their phones or whispering to each other. But then, one of them sneezed. The boy who had taken my bet groaned. "Hey, that's not fair. It was just a sneeze." I shrugged. "I didn't make the rules. You made noise. I win." The other teenagers looked at me in disbelief. "You can't be serious." I smiled sweetly. "Oh, I am." The teenagers grumbled, but I could tell they were a bit impressed. They tried again, determined to keep quiet for the next hour. But it wasn't long before another one of them coughed, and then someone's phone buzzed. Each time, I reminded them that they had made noise and I had won. The teenagers were getting increasingly frustrated, but I just smiled and counted my money. Finally, the hour was up, and the teenagers were relieved to be able to talk again. They handed me my $50 and started to walk away. But I wasn't done yet. "Hey, before you go, I have one more thing to say. You know how you were being really loud and obnoxious earlier?" The boy who had taken my bet looked annoyed. "What? Are you going to lecture us now?" "No, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm going to give you some advice. You don't have to be loud to have fun. You can have a good time without disturbing other people. And if you do disturb other people, don't be surprised if someone like me comes along and teaches you a lesson." The teenagers grumbled, but didn't say anything. They walked away, and Evelyn and I went back into the coffee shop. I could tell she was still a bit skeptical about my plan. "That was kind of mean, Madison," she said. I shrugged. They were being rude. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. "But what if they come back and cause more trouble?" she asked. I grinned. "Then we'll be ready for them." As it turned out, the teenagers didn't come back to cause any more trouble. But a few days later, I got a surprise visit from the boy who had taken my bet. He looked nervous as he approached me. "Hey, I just wanted to say, you were right. We were being really loud and obnoxious, and we shouldn't have been. I'm sorry." I was a bit taken aback. Thanks. I appreciate that." He shuffled his feet. "And I was wondering, could you teach me how to do that malicious compliance thing?" I laughed. "Sure, kid. I'll teach you everything I know." From that day on, the boy and I became unlikely allies. He was still a bit of a troublemaker, but he learned to do it in a way that didn't bother other people, and I felt like I had made a difference, even if it was just a small one. As for the villain of this story, well, I never saw him again, but I like to think that he learned his lesson, and that he'll think twice before disturbing the peace again. After all, in this small town, you never know who might be watching, waiting to teach you a tough lesson. Story 2. In the past, I've made posts about my jerk of a brother. But this time something else happened. I decided to go camping again for the first time, this year because of spring break. Though I only got the weekend to go. But it was just enough for me to unwind. My brother didn't follow me like he used to. I think I've finally gotten him to understand screwing with me is just not worth it anymore after he drank that growler full of laxative-spiked beer he stole from me last year. So the drama from him has been bad for the past few months. Though he's still an entitled jerk, and I've got plenty of things to tell about him and his antics from the months I wasn't posting. I figured my worries about camping trouble were over. But no, I had to deal with a lunatic Karen. I'd already spent one night at my campsite. I was loving the fresh air, and fortunately rain was minimal. That's the only reason I went. Otherwise I'd have just stayed home. But I had an itch to scratch to get out and enjoy some mountain air. I was far from alone as the spaces around me were full of tents, trailers, and RVs. Plenty of people caught the camping bug during spring break, just like I did. I was sitting relaxed in a folding lawn chair and watching Tailspin on my portable DVD player. Yeah, I know it's a cartoon, and an old one at that. But I enjoy since as a kid, I used to watch some old tapes of it a cousin had. And I've owned the DVDs of the complete series for around 10 years. And I won't deny I've always had a bit of a crush on the character Rebecca Cunningham. I had headphones on because other campers were playing music, barbecuing, and doing other things. I was just chilling and letting myself mentally zone out with some refreshing cold beer when I got a sudden and hard tap on my shoulder that frankly scared the piss out of me for a second. And then I turned around to see a roughly middle-aged woman in over-tight purple yoga pants with her hands on her hips. She didn't have the Karen haircut, but she did have the bleach blonde hair and overly large bug-eye sunglasses. I know in this situation a lot of people will reflexively say, "Can I help you?" But that's just giving an opening to these people to say whatever they want. So my first reaction is to just angrily say, "What? Can't you see I'm trying to relax by myself?" That set her aback for a second. She didn't go away, so I paused the episode I was on and grumpily asked her what she was bothering me about. She spoke up in a matter-of-fact way that sounded like she was trying to be in charge. I guess trying to activate mom mode on a stranger. But I think the unfriendly scowl on my face was enough to show that I'm not exactly friendly. So she just pointed at the portable DVD player and said that she wanted to borrow it and the headphones for her daughter. To make it brief, I said no. And no is a complete sentence. Because I don't know her, I don't know if she'd bring it back. And I certainly don't know if her kid wouldn't damage it. I do actually keep a smaller backup portable DVD player in the camper too. But I wasn't about to let this woman know that. Well, she certainly didn't take to being told off like that well, and then launched into a tirade about how I was a grown man watching cartoons, how they only have one TV in their RV, and her daughter needs something to watch because her kids can't agree on what to watch. So she needs my DVD player. I coldly said that was not happening, and she actually gave me a loud, "Why not?" So I pointed out to her that this was really not my problem. And she just crossed her arms and said that as an adult, I should be putting kids first. I said that would be the case if I had kids. But her kids are not my kids, I don't know them, and I'm in no way related to them, and therefore I have no obligation to them. So she rolled her eyes, and then tried to offer me money for the headphones and DVD player. Admittedly, I didn't pay much for either of them. But I don't care. I wasn't interested in selling. She only offered $20 for both anyway. I just told her no, and to kindly leave me alone to watch movies in peace. Then I tried to just sit back down and resume the episode. She didn't take that well, and proceeded to try and grab my DVD player right in front of me, like I was just going to let her walk off with it. I got up and stopped her while saying, "That ain't yours, lady." She proceeded to try and shove me over. Try being the word. She clearly underestimated how heavy I am. I don't look it at all, but I'm around 230 pounds. My body frame just hides it well, and I've been in a few brawls in my life. I ended up grabbing her arms and shoving her back with little effort. She fell on her bum into some wet grass and started yelling that I'd assaulted her while looking around for support. I've seen enough Karen stories to know where this goes if I say nothing. So I yelled, "Yeah, assault. Assault on me when you tried to push me over and steal my stuff. And there's plenty of witnesses around us, lady, or did you not notice?" There had already been a few people around us watching the whole altercation, and they'd gone dead quiet while staring. So then I said to everyone, "Check it out, we've got a bona fide Karen here who tried to take my stuff for her precious angel baby. Everybody clap for her." And they did. They actually started clapping. The Karen looked completely humiliated and stormed off screeching that I was an asshole. Her yoga pants ass was all wet from the grass too, which only made it funnier. I kept thinking, "Your ass is grass," as she walked away, but I didn't say it aloud. I tried to resume watching the DVD as I was, but I felt uneasy the Karen might come back. She snuck up on me rather easily before, and I didn't want to risk that again, so I packed up and went back into my camper to continue watching and drinking inside. Got pretty plastered that night. I remember giggling like a moron while watching the episode with the panda people that were evil Chinese stereotypes. Stayed at the campsite for one more night and didn't see the Karen again until I was leaving Sunday afternoon. I saw her standing by her posh-looking RV with a large fountain beverage in one hand and a dog leash in the other. It was one of those yappy little fluffball dogs too. She glared at me as I drove past, and I just waved to her and said, "Bye Karen," out my window. She threw her drink at my truck, but none of it got in through the window. I could hear her yelling at me, but couldn't really make out a word of it. I'm not sure what goes on in the heads of these people. I understand this could have gotten a lot worse, like that nut bar sicking the local ranger on me or something. But I think the public humiliation was enough to make her back off. I can only wonder if the rest of her family is just like her. Glad I didn't meet them. Story 3. I only ever read these kinds of encounters on Reddit, so I was taken aback when it happened to me. Apologies for any language errors. English is not my first language. I hope my experience fits this subreddit. Sorry for the format. I'm on my phone. Edit for formatting. Last month, I took a flight back home after visiting my parents. During boarding, I walked to my seat, 23A. There was already someone sitting there. I had to double-check to make sure it was the 23rd row. Yep, I was right. So, I told the lady sitting there that it was my seat. Suddenly, a man in 23D offered me the 23E seat. It turned out they were a family, and the mother didn't want to be separated from her children who were in 23B and 23C, so she took my 23A. I was confused. It wasn't like she would be separated from her children for long. The children were in 23B 23C, and she and her husband were in 23D 23E, only separated by an aisle. Obviously, I refused. I specifically booked a window seat. It helps me feel at ease looking at the clouds and helps me fall asleep. The seat they offered me to trade was the middle seat, 23E, trapped between the dad 23D and a random man 23F in a narrow airplane seat. Nope. I felt suffocated already. I flatly replied, "No, I booked the window seat." The mother immediately felt offended. she replied harshly. So you don't mind us, a family, sitting separately? Well, why didn't you book the right seats in the first place? I didn't say this out loud, though. I only repeated, "That's my seat." I was adamant about my answer. Finally, she got up, walking away from my seat with angry words whispered silently towards me. I chose not to pay any attention to them. However, things changed afterward. Her children were still sitting in the 23B and 23C seats, so I couldn't get to my seat. I asked them politely to get out of their seats so I could get in. What did the mother do? She body shamed me. "Kids, get up. Her body is huge. She can't get in." My height is above the women's average height in my country. Plus, I gained like 10 kilograms during the pandemic. I already have body dysmorphia, so comments like that hurt my feelings badly. With that comment, I couldn't stay silent. I replied, "So what? So what if I'm huge?" She didn't silence easily. She kept on and on with the insults towards me, even louder. Her daughter, silently and with blatant panic, whispered to me, "Please forgive my mother. She is always like that." Her daughter, who I assumed was no more than 12 years old, looked sincere. It helped tune out the angry insults from the aisle because I felt bad for her. The angry tirade stopped around 5 minutes later when the mother told her kids to move seats a few rows away. Once more, the daughter pleaded for an apology to me. It's crazy to think that a 12-year-old was way more emotionally mature than her entitled 40-something mother. The whole time her mother spouted insults at me. The daughter looked pale and her body was rigid. Her gaze was fixated on one spot. I assume she was very embarrassed. Poor kid. Story 4. I remembered this story while talking with some of my coworkers during lunch, and they all suggested I post it. So I figured, why not? I should probably preface this story with a few things. I'm a welder who works for a not-so-respectable company. The layout of the workshop consists of half a dozen cubicles where we each work. Straight ahead is what looks like a garage door where metal is brought in and finished projects are shipped out. I remember it was a beautiful summer day, and we had some metal that needed to be cut. We took an acetylene torch, or metal, and a metal sawhorse and got to work. For those who don't know, an acetylene torch burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit 2200 degrees Celsius, and this detail will be important soon. I was wearing a welding helmet and earplugs, so I couldn't hear or see the she-devil known as Karen approaching. I felt someone tapping me on my shoulder, so I shut off the torch, flipped my helmet up, and took out my earplugs. I looked at the coworker who had gotten my attention, and he directed me towards the angry woman. She started to complain and gripe that we were making too much noise, and that we needed to quiet down. A few welders had stopped what they were doing to see what the commotion was about, but those of us outside just looked at each other. I tried to explain as politely as I could that as welders, the equipment we use and the tasks we undergo come with some amount of noise. She screamed some unintelligible nonsense, I think it was in Latin. Then, one of my coworkers pulled out a small packet of earplugs and said something like, "If the noise is that bad, I've got some spare earplugs you can have." With that, she once again shouted at us to be quiet and stormed off. Most of us just laughed it off and got back to work. Maybe a few hours later, I was still cutting metal when I felt someone shove me hard. As I was shoved, my arm holding the still running torch moved, causing the flame to hit me in the helmet. The plastic of the helmet melted and started to stick to my skin. Keep in mind, this was happening as I was falling. I hit the ground yelling and screaming as I had hot plastic searing into my skin. I was scrambling at my partially melted helmet, trying to get it off. I finally managed to tear it off, and in the process, I knocked my earplugs out. I could then hear my coworkers and Karen shouting at one another. They were all putting themselves between us, and one of my coworkers, who we'll call Juan, was seeing that I was okay. He helped me up and was leading me away when our boss, an absolute beast of a man, barged into the shop. I heard him shout, and everyone quieted down. I don't know what all was said, but I later found out that the whole thing had been recorded and the police had been called. To cut to the chase, the woman got arrested for assault. I was sent to the hospital with first-degree burns, and I got to spend some paid time off work to recover. Overall, all's well that ends well, I guess. Story 5. It was my best friend's wedding, and I was her maid of honor. I had been looking forward to this day for months, and I couldn't wait to see her walk down the aisle. As I got ready for the day, I couldn't help but think about the journey that brought me here. I had met my best friend in college, and we had hit it off right away. We were both studying to become social workers, and we had a lot in common. We both had a passion for helping others and making the world a better place. After college, we both got jobs in different states, but we stayed in touch. We would talk on the phone for hours, sharing stories about our work and our lives. When my best friend told me she was getting married, I was overjoyed. I knew I had to be there for her on her special day. The wedding was being held at a beautiful venue on the outskirts of town. It was a warm and sunny day, and everything was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, and my best friend looked stunning in her white dress. After the ceremony, we all gathered outside for the reception. That's when I met her, the entitled woman who would ruin everything. I was standing near the bar, waiting for my turn to order a drink when she walked up to me. She was wearing a tight-fitting dress and towering heels. She had a fake tan and a ton of makeup on her face. She looked like she had just stepped out of a reality TV show. "Excuse me," she said, "but can you get me a drink?" I turned to her and smiled politely. "Of course," I said. "What would you like?" "I'll have a martini," she said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. I went to the bar and ordered her drink, but when I turned around, she was gone. I looked around the room and spotted her at a table, talking to some other guests. I walked over and handed her the drink. "Thanks," she said, taking a sip. I smiled and was about to walk away when she grabbed my arm. "Actually, can you get me another one?" she said. "This one is too weak." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but I don't work here," I said. "I'm just a guest." The entitled woman rolled her eyes. "Well, you look like you work here," she said. "And besides, it's not like it's a big deal." I sighed and went back to the bar to get her another drink. When I returned, she was talking to some other guests again. I handed her the drink and started to walk away, but she grabbed my arm again. "You know what?" she said. "I think I'll just take the bottle." I looked at her in disbelief. "Excuse me?" I said. "I said I'll take the bottle," she repeated, her voice rising. "Just give it to me." I shook my head. "I can't do that," I said. "I'm sorry." The entitled woman's face turned red. "You're sorry," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're sorry? You know what? Forget it. I'll just go get it myself." And with that, she stormed off. I watched her go, feeling angry and frustrated. Who did she think she was? I didn't know her, and I certainly didn't owe her anything. Story 6. I 31M have a sister 28F who has always been the golden child to our mother, but not to our father. My parents divorced when I was a teenager because my mother cheated with an old high school ex-boyfriend. She has always been controlling, manipulative, and narcissistic. Unfortunately, my sister turned out to be a little mini-me of our mother. Our mother also seemed to believe she had total authority over me whenever she so much as snapped her fingers. She would snap them and order me around like a dog, which was demeaning. My sister always backed her up too. So, no surprise, I went to live with my dad full-time after our parents split, while my sister stayed with our mom. The two of them were very alike and pretty much stopped speaking with my father, unless it was about money. I'm more like my dad, who was very business-oriented and started teaching me his line of work as soon as I was 16. I got pretty good at it, and after 12 years of working for my father, I became a partner in his company. Things were great. But then about 8 months ago, tragedy struck. My father, a heavy smoker for much of his life, became somewhat immunocompromised and died at only 60 years old after he caught COVID-19. I met my mother and sister for the first time in years after we had a socially distanced funeral for my father over a video call. My father was cremated by his own request and buried in a local cemetery, so there was no body or casket. My sister seemed to grieve, but my mother looked indifferent the entire time. I honestly was not surprised. The last time she saw my father, she screamed at him that he owed her more money and then threatened to sue him. He just laughed at her. He had paid alimony and child support as long as he was legally mandated to and no more. He even put $30,000 toward my sister's college fund. But 10 years after the divorce, he was no longer legally required to send my mom money anymore because of the judge's ruling. She's by no means broke. She works the same job she has had for nearly 3 decades, fully owns the old family home we used to share, and even rents out 2 of the rooms in it to Airbnb regularly. She's not hurting for money. Some time after the funeral, my dad's will was read. Apparently, he figured that if his heavy smoking didn't eventually do him in, something else would. He even joked about it in a pre-recorded video. I was willed nearly all of his assets, from most of his money to his business and home. He left my sister a car 2015 Nissan Altima and about $10,000 in cash. My mother only got $1,000 and a few other items that she'd been claiming were rightfully hers since the divorce. Beyond that, I got the rest. Now, my girlfriend lives with me in the house my father passed down to me. My sister pretty much went from finishing 2 years of community college to living off her boyfriend and only working part-time online for several years. During that time, she got pregnant but suffered a traumatic miscarriage. I wasn't aware of it until after the funeral because we were practically no contact and no one else told me. When lockdown hit, her boyfriend's job started downsizing little by little until he was only able to stay on part-time. This hampered their finances to the point he finally told her she needed to look for better employment since he was trying to find a second job. Then she got pregnant again. She claims she and her boyfriend were careful, but calls it her miracle baby. One evening, I got an unexpected knock at my door. When I answered, I was unpleasantly greeted by both my mother and sister. They both walked right in without even asking and made themselves comfortable in my living room. My girlfriend and I shared a look of confusion, and I asked why they'd come by. My sister was giggling and looking all over, opening doors and seemingly giving herself a tour of my home. My mother just plopped herself down on my sofa and snapped her fingers, demanding a cold bottled water. My girlfriend got the water for her, and I asked what they were here for. My sister seemed all giddy and ignored me, continuing to snoop around my home. Before long, I heard her yell from down the hall, "Mommy, it's perfect." Yes, she still calls her mommy. My mother finally spoke up and said, "Well, I think it's time you did your brotherly duty." I was like, "What?" My mother then proceeded to say, "Now that your father has passed, this house should have gone to me since I was his only spouse. But you can still fix this. You make plenty of money and could just buy a new house. Your sister needs this one so much more since she's the one with a baby on the way. But if you're so determined to stay, you could just keep to one room and cover all the bills until you decide to move out." My girlfriend and I read enough Reddit to know exactly where this was going and how it'd play out if I let it go on. So, we were mentally prepared. I took a deep breath and stated aloud, "That's not happening. You don't order me around, especially not in my own home. Yes, I make plenty of money, but like Dad, I'm going to save it for when I really need it, not that you care." My mother started snapping her fingers at me like she used to and loudly stated, "Stop. I am your mother, and you will do as I say because I brought you into this world, and I'm the one in charge here, and as far as you're concerned, I am God. That means when I say jump, you say how high. This house is rightfully mine, and your sister will live here. Consider this your formal eviction. But since I'm gracious, I'll give you 2 weeks to pack your bags and transfer the deed to me." In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this can't be real. But then I just grabbed my cell phone and started dialing. My mother quickly stood up and yelled, "What are you doing?" I retorted. "I'm doing what I should have done as soon as this started. I'm calling the cops to get you out of my house." She started swiping at me and managed to knock my phone out of my hands. Then she tried to stomp on it, but I was quick enough to snatch it up before she could. "That's it. If you don't leave, I will force you out myself." My mother slapped me across the face. I returned the favor twice as hard, backhanding her so much that I knocked her back down onto the couch. She held her hand over her reddening and smeared makeup face in total shock, then yelled, "How dare you!" I went back to dialing on my phone and said that if she didn't leave, I would have the police come and remove her by force. My sister came barreling in between us, holding her arms out and saying that I should just do the right thing for once in my life and be a good big brother. I snapped and said, "Oh really? I'm the bad sibling. Last I checked, I was the one who had to work for a living since I was a teenager. I had to do all the chores in the house while you just sat on your behind playing video games or talking with your friends all day, and you used to steal my hard-earned money just to go out shopping after you spent all of your allowance. You're a complete mooch and thief, so I don't owe you anything. Now both of you get out before I decide to dial this last number." My sister started to tear up, crying like a baby, and said, "Mommy, make him stop." My mother began hugging her and kissing her cheeks while giving me a death glare. Then she seemed to think she'd gotten smart and said, "You know, if you do call the police, I can just tell them that you hit me. And who knows, I could maybe say to everyone you wanted to do a lot worse to a poor pregnant girl in need. I don't think that'd be very good for your—" I cut her off with a raised hand and said, "Just stop. If you haven't noticed, my girlfriend over there has had her phone out recording almost this whole time. That means we have recorded evidence of you assaulting me first and openly stating you'd lie to police. I don't think that'd be so good for your reputation at your job or your little Airbnb." If looks could kill, my mother would have blown me up like a tactical nuke. But she quickly deflated and started dragging my crying sister out by the arm. My sister was acting like a complete toddler, breaking loose of our mother's grip to sit down on my porch step and have a tantrum. I gave my mother a look and said, "Do you see now? This is the result of the spoiled way you raised her." She glared at me again, and then I was treated to a show of my mother trying to drag my sister off my porch steps. But she latched onto the porch handrails, repeatedly saying, "You promised me." I let out a cackle and told them both from the door to never come back. My mother flipped me off and went back to trying to drag my sister off the porch. It took a few minutes, but she finally got my sister to get up and leave with her by saying I am a cruel, heartless bastard who will go to hell for this. I laughed some more and said that there's also a special place in hell for liars and narcissists who try to manipulate others to get their way. My mother clenched her fists and was about to say more when I just held up my smartphone again with it recording and said, "The clock is ticking. Mom, get off my property." My mother then walked my sister to the car, gave me one last snooty look, and drove off. I thought that was the end of it, but letting things go was never something my mother would do. After a few days, I started getting messages from people I know and some relatives online. Many of them were furious with me, but others had questions about what was going on. I tried to check my Facebook, but couldn't see anything they were saying because my sister and mother both blocked me on their social media. However, my girlfriend could still see everything because they kept their profiles set to open. We screenshotted everything and printed some of it out. Both of their profiles had posts that called me a greedy, heartless person who stole the house that was meant to be my sister's inheritance right out from under her by paying off the lawyer who handled Dad's will. This is a complete and utter lie, and they both know it. I called my lawyer, who was also my father's lawyer and a trusted family friend, and gave him copies of all the screenshots from Facebook and the video my girlfriend had recorded the day my mother demanded my house. He wanted to just write a formal cease and desist letter, but I wanted to take it further. He sent them a letter via express mail that had to be signed for, so I knew they got it. My mother called me in an absolute fury the same day the letter was delivered. I told her that if she and my sister didn't redact all the untrue social media posts about me and tell the absolute truth, I'd send all the information I have to the entire family, her boss, and upload the videos we recorded online. I would also sue her on top of it. She called me unreasonable and said she just did what she did for my sister's sake. Then she went into a full-blown lecture reiterating her belief that my sister still needs my house more than me. I bluntly stated I didn't care what she thought, and if she didn't redact everything and tell the truth, I'd make sure her career would be over. She begrudgingly said, "Fine, you win. Have it your way and keep the house," before hanging up the phone. That very evening, all the lying posts disappeared from both their profiles. I was unblocked, and my mother gave me and everyone else a half-hearted apology. She claimed she jumped the gun with everything she said because she thought my sister needed my house more than I did because she was broke and pregnant. However, the house was rightfully mine according to my father's will, and she knew that even before my father passed away, so she had no right to try and claim it. As for my sister, she also apologized but more or less just parroted everything our mother said, while claiming she just went along with her ideas. She blamed her actions on our mother and her pregnancy hormones. Replies poured in for some time on both my mother and sister's profiles, many furious with them for trying to take my house. I received many messages of sorry and my bad from those who had previously believed them. But all it really did was show me who was more on her side to begin with, as they were all quick to believe her nonsense. They were mostly people from her side of the family anyway. No one on my father's side believed her at all and openly said so. My sister and her boyfriend ended up moving in with our mother to save money. However, she put them in the basement to keep her Airbnb running. My sister started crying on social media that she couldn't live upstairs, and I'm pretty sure the two of them were fighting with each other because all my sister did after that was complain online, while my mother barely posted anything on social media anymore because of the previous stunt she'd tried. And for those of you who read this far, it's not the end of the story. Stay tuned for the rest soon.